Because I think sometimes we get wrapped up in company names or job titles or locations, and we forget about how it's really like this holistic, everything comes together to create what your life post grad is going to look like. And it's not for forever, but I just want people to really think about what they want versus what their parent wants, what's going to look the coolest on LinkedIn, really thinking through like, what skill sets do you want to learn in what environment? Because that combination is going to be super important to you enjoying the first few years post-grad.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Career Hack, a podcast dedicated to assisting college students and early career professionals with entering the workforce and ascending the corporate ladder. I'm Brandon Amoroso, co-founder of Apex, a scaleless company that sends 30 plus internships a day to college students that are seeking their next opportunity. And today I'm talking with Heather Henderson, who's the principal recruiter, university talent at Uber. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Brandon. I'm excited to be here.
So before we jump into all the nuances and strategy around campus recruiting, can you give everybody just a brief background on yourself?
Yes. So I have been a university recruiter now for 9 years. I know that sounds really crazy. I've worked at some of the top tech companies in the world. I've also had the pleasure of working in fintech and consulting. And before I became a corporate recruiter, I was an academic advisor at UC Santa Cruz. And then fun fact, I actually came from a background of higher ed professionals. My parents were both staff members at the university. And so I grew up in the math department at Sonoma State. So my entire career and even before that has been helping students achieve their dreams, both of achieving their goals in education and also helping them launch their career after they graduate.
That's awesome. You've been in it for forever.
Exactly. I've never left. So I always tell people I love working with students and that's what keeps me going. And so anytime I can give any tips, I'm super transparent. So I'm the person like, if you have the question, I'm most likely going to answer in a way that you've never heard it answered before because my experience goes both through higher ed and corporate. So I kind of have a more holistic view of what students are going through as they really launch their post-grad careers.
You mentioned that you were just out in Detroit for an event. So can you talk a little bit about sort of what, I guess, a year looks like for you? Like, what are the things that you're doing as a principal recruiter for university talent? And then I think we can dive into what are some of the things that the students themselves should be thinking about when you're attending or going to some of these things.
Absolutely. So I always feel like our summers are very intern heavy. But when you think about someone like myself, I'm a talent scout, which means I'm part of the team that goes out onto campus. So summer is really a time for us to not only connect with our interns, but also plan for fall. Fall is always going to be our heavy campus recruitment time where we're hosting events at different campuses and also hosting virtual events for maybe some schools we don't attend in person. And so this is going to be like, I always tell students, this is your prime opportunity to meet in person with a recruiter. And if you do go to a school where you have companies attending career fairs, info sessions, hackathons, making contact with that recruiter in the moment is going to be gold. And so then after we kind of go to campus, we get people excited and interested in our positions, we post the roles, and then we start reviewing resumes and actually getting candidates in progress. So I'm one of the people who is responsible for reviewing the resumes that we receive and then helping students through the recruitment process, whether that's going through an online assessment, multiple interview rounds, and then even up to extending verbal offers. And so it's really an exciting time. One thing I can tell you too, though, if you think about it, like fall traditionally was more new grad hiring and some sprinkling in of internships. What we found that's happening right now, post pandemic is that companies are actually recruiting full time. And so you'll see us, we'll recruit in fall and spring for interns, but we'll actually be recruiting year round for new grads. And so we actually hired a large cohort of new grads this summer. So while I can talk to you about the standard of what we normally do, I also want to just encourage students to always be looking, always be applying, because uh, there are opportunities throughout the year. And that's something that has definitely changed, I'd say, in like the last 5 years.
How important is it to get the in-person connection when going through that application process?
Yeah. So it all depends on the company, I would say, because each company will handle it differently. I've been, on a consulting team that literally tracked every event that a student went to and used that when they were making their resume selections. At Uber, we are very much invested in the groups that we partner with. So there is a certain level of priority that goes to people we've met in person. And when you think about it, a company is spending X amount of dollars to send their team out to the school to partner with these student organizations or hackathons. And so when you think about it, it's really an ROI for us where we want to see that return on us. Maybe it's not even like financial, maybe it's also like just our time, right? Like I spent the weekend at the University of Michigan. And so having those moments and meeting students in person, I think is both a reward from like a perspective of people looking at ROI, but also for me, I love building out relationships. And sometimes a relationship is a multi-year relationship. And I actually think that those are the most beneficial. Maybe you hit the career fair or an info session freshman, sophomore year, and you start the conversation so that when I come back at year three, I already know you. I know about your projects, and I've had that chance to really build out the relationship. I think one thing I'm seeing, and it's really impacted me in the last week, is that our emails are now all leaked online. So through AI scraping, people can get our contact information like that. And it is actually making it really hard for us to kind of sort through the noise to get to students that we'd like to move forward with. And so that's where I think our technology is actually pushing us back to being more in person and really building those interpersonal relationships on campus. Because I even get like random text messages from people now. So just know that when you have a recruiter in person, that's the best moment to really like shoot your shot in a way, because there's a lot of noise that's coming out with just the advancements in modern technology.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a blessing and a curse. All the AI advancements when it comes to things like that, but it is sort of amusing to me that I think a lot of companies when they're hiring now they're looking for people who know how to leverage and use AI, but then at the same time you don't really want people to be abusing it when it comes to their application process. Um, but I've heard that it's pretty easy to tell when it's been sort of over AI'd, either the outreach or the resume or cover letter or a submission of the application itself. Um, so there's
Mhm.
definitely a give and take there.
Absolutely.
What sort of roles are you typically recruiting for? Are they technical? Are they what sort of departments are you typically looking for?
So I am under the engineering umbrella. I recruit both software engineers, intern new grads, and then I just picked up a new profile. I am recruiting our machine learning new grads as well. And then at the end of the season, I sometimes get thrown into the mix. Actuary sciences, anything that the team really needs help with. I've done design before as well. So uh, it kind of can vary based off of business need. I actually started out as a non-tech recruiter at Visa, and I was mainly focused on MBA as well. So I've done non-tech, but the last 5 years has been primarily tech.
For those tech roles, how important is the sort of project history versus GPA or more like standard academic achievement?
I would say project is probably more beneficial, but I will say that each company handles this differently. There are some companies who require GPA, and there are other companies who don't even look at it. I've worked at teams that do both. And so that will really vary from company to company. and maybe even profile to profile when you think about a job profile. But I would say for me, it is understanding how you utilize your technologies. And I think projects is the best place to do this, and also to showcase your personality and like what you're specifically interested in. Because when I think about like an internship project specifically, that's sometimes handed to you, right? Like you're told what to do. Then when you think about like your actual projects that you've worked on, whether it's through hackathons, side projects, class projects, I feel like that's where you can actually showcase your personality as it comes to being an engineer, of like what excites you, and know that an engineer in an interview can ask you about that anytime, but that could actually be like a really cool connection point if they're able to understand the project and like the passions behind that.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it'll be interesting over the next 5-10 years how much less importance may or may not be placed on like the traditional academic achievement. Because I know like at my previous business, we hired a bunch of people who never even went to college. They might have gone to like a coding boot camp and then they just started working, and then they have a body of work which is actually far more useful and relevant than if you were in a classroom for 4 years instead. So it'll be interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Aside from the in-person sort of connection, what are some of the ways that you've seen people be able to stand out in what I imagine is a relatively crowded application pool at a company like Uber? I know some businesses, it's sort of the other side of the coin where you have to, you just don't have that brand name recognition. You don't have sort of that aura or allure of a company like that. Mm-hmm. So I imagine your challenges here are different than what they might be at other businesses. How do you manage, sifting through all the potential people that could be, coming in the door and starting their career with Uber?
So I really do look at extracurricular activities, and I think that that's something that nobody really talks about enough. We hear about it when we're like applying to college, but you don't really hear that when you're like applying to a company. But I think it really shows leadership. And so and I get this a lot from freshmen and sophomores, like maybe they've never had a formal internship before. We have Uber Star, and that's actually not a requirement. And so they say, how can I showcase my skill set? And so I think it's through the different student organizations that you're a part of, because to me, that shows that you're a leader on campus. You're investing in this community and you understand how to collaborate with other engineers in a sense, right? Because you are in the room. Sometimes I think just being in the room is super important. And then it is always going to go back to thinking through those projects, because I think that anyone can like have a project, right? Doesn't necessarily need to be like an internship. So that's where I see people joining the hackathons or doing the side projects. And then I would say also the different languages and like the libraries, and really trying to showcase your interest. And so I know some companies, like for example, we use Go. You don't have to have Go, but having some experience with Go or using a project in a language that a company is utilizing, I think that is also going to set you up. But that does take some research in a way, because you need to start learning about the different companies that you're interested in. And so that's where I think people can really start to explore in a way that makes it authentic to them, while also like understanding how can I add value to this company.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The thing I've heard time and time again for engineering talent is that it's becoming more and more important to have like interpersonal skills and being able to connect and collaborate cross functionally. How relevant is that? Because I think the sort of stigma or the idea of you can just show up at your laptop and code for 8 hours a day and then disappear is probably no longer accurate.
It is not. And I would say people missing out on that communication piece is actually going to be something that I see people not getting through, like, so not getting supported for hire after interviews, because they were never able to communicate effectively. And so even if you have the coding abilities, but you're not able to communicate your strategy or your solution like to the engineer, that's going to be one of the biggest flags. And people get so surprised by this because they think that they need to get to an optimal solution. But sometimes it's not even about getting to the optimal solution. It's about communicating throughout the interview. And it's also like asking clarifying questions. I can't tell you how many times I see this where students will just jump right into coding and they don't ask any of the clarifying questions and they don't understand fully the problem before they jump into coding. And that is something that we see. It's probably the number one reason why people don't pass through a technical interview. And so when I go to campus, I'm always talking to people about like, feel comfortable talking, like get comfortable, do mock interviews with each other, share what you're doing so that you can get comfortable with that. And then even in the internship, right, when we do the internship debriefs at the end of the summer and we kind of start thinking about, okay, who do we want to extend a return offer to? Like who had great like skills? When I sit in those, sometimes I hear people say, they just didn't communicate. They came in, they were quiet, they didn't ask questions. And so I think that is another place where people don't see that return offer. And it's because they're either under communicating or even over communicating. And I think over communicating is not talked about enough. And so sometimes when you're asking instead of going out and trying to find it yourself, or asking the same person over and over again, or asking the same question multiple times without retaining that information. I think all of these are examples of how people can miss out on that communication piece. And when we think about it, we're all working on teams. And especially if you're a part of a global company, you can really start to see that communication is key, because if you can't communicate your ideas to somebody else, then how valuable are they to the organization that you are working with?
Yeah, the whole concept around like individual contributor versus team contributor, I think, is becoming more and more important.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of value in being able to, not even necessarily you could be less individually talented, but if you're able to collaborate and be a team player and bring forward a sort of a holistic solution, then that's far more important than if you can just be a great IC. Are you seeing anything around sort of AI and how that's impacting development? I know there's some tools and resources that like our team uses to speed things up pretty quickly on their end, but how do you balance talent versus something else is just doing the coding?
We are in the midst of it right now, kind of figuring out what that means for us, especially like as recruiters. And so one thing is, it's not necessarily like using AI to keep us like on pace with candidates that are also using AI. But I would say we implemented an OA for the first time into our process, because if you think about it, candidates are able to apply faster than ever. And so we had to figure out a way to like kind of start narrowing down the pipeline there. And so we did implement an OA globally. So all interns and new grads will complete that. And that's something that I've been at Uber now 5 years and we've never done that. So that's kind of one way that we're working through it. But I think we're still kind of figuring out what that means. And if you think about it, we're a pretty big company now, right? So it's going to take us a little bit longer to catch up than if we were a more agile startup or even a small to mid-sized company. So we're starting to get closer and closer to being one of those like tech giants. And so it does take us a little bit longer. So I would say more to come on that, but I haven't actually seen anything other than like implementing the OA.
When it comes to, you mentioned, tech giant, is there a lot of competition amongst sort of let's just keep using that term, I guess, amongst the tech giants for very particular talent? Like, is it sort of skewed in the sense that, maybe 90% of, people looking for a job, they're really the ones that are having to actively search and hope to get that position, but maybe like, 5 to 10% of the candidates are really being sought after for a particular reason or skill set, and it's amongst a whole consortium of the tech giants.
Absolutely. I see this all the time. And while I don't sit on the team that handles competing offers, I do know when I'm speaking to students, whether it's like somebody at the University of Waterloo, where they have like those people could come out with like 6+ offers from like all tech giants, and then you're kind of competing. But I do also see it in the Bay all the time, right? And it's where, and especially in the niche skill set. So for me this summer, I saw it in machine learning. And so you start to see like, okay, who like in tech is really looking for those like machine learning. And so then you start, going up against Pinterest and Google and Microsoft, and start seeing like how we're all going after the same talent. But I think that that actually makes university recruiters even more special, because I find that if you're able to build a relationship with your recruiter, or as a recruiter with my candidates, that's where we can start sharing the more nuances of each company. Because I've worked at 4 different major companies, and they've all been really different. And I think people ask me all the time, like, why have you been at Uber for 5 years? And for me, it's because I finally found a place where I felt like I fit, where I could build, and like just the culture and the size just really worked for me. And so when I always think about it in terms of like the different companies, is that there's kind of a different flavor for everyone. And it's kind of your responsibility to go out and do the research, but also to think through, if you're there, like I was at Google for under 2 years. It just didn't fit me. It was too much of like a big organization where I was only doing a very small piece. And so that was okay. Some people were really freaked out by that, of like, you're going to literally leave Google. I did. And it was one of the best decisions that I ever made. It was super scary, but it just goes to show, it's kind of, you should think about it kind of like the university, of like when you were going and touring campuses, what were you looking for? Figuring out like where you fit, I think, is so important. And so being open early in your career to trying different things, trying to go to different sizes, different types, and really figure out, again, like what you're looking for.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that before. The fear, or the sort of you know you are hesitant to leave because of the name sort of recognition of a particular company. Um, when it comes to those competing offers, I know you mentioned that you're not necessarily a part of that team, but what would you advise a student who is coming out of school with more than one offer, how to balance pros and
Mhm.
cons beyond just compensation?
Yeah. So for me, I think it's being super honest and transparent with the recruiter that you're working with, and asking the questions, and not being afraid to come off as what, like, just asking too much. You're in the driver's seat at that point. Like if you have these offers, they're trying to sell you. So you can start asking for certain things. My biggest piece of advice is asking to meet with somebody from the team. So asking for a coffee chat, whether that's with the hiring manager and or also a team member, because you want to get the perspective of like, what is it going to be like working with this specific manager versus like, okay, let me talk to somebody who's on the team, who's closer to my level, whether or not it's a return intern, a current new grad, to really start to understand the entire scope of the team, if that's possible. And then also knowing like, if you don't get team matched before you accept your offer, understanding and really asking like, what does that process look like? Like, what's the probability of me getting into this specific niche tech or location, or whatever your preferences are? And really kind of thinking through, having like a template of like, this is what I'm interested in and how can I get closest to that. Because I think sometimes we get wrapped up in company names or job titles or locations, and we forget about how it's really like this holistic, everything comes together to create what your life post grad is going to look like. And it's not for forever, but I just want people to really think about what they want versus what their parent wants, what's going to look the coolest on LinkedIn, really thinking through like, what skill sets do you want to learn in what environment? Because that combination is going to be super important to you enjoying the first few years post grad.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of, I think, external pressures that new grad faces, whether it's parents or social reputation or things like that, that probably cloud judgment. I don't think any of us are immune to that, but and it is difficult to sort of separate out what do you actually want to do versus what is expected of you to do. If you had just one thing that you would do as, like, let's say you were, about to enter into the workforce, what's the one thing that you would be doing to make sure that you secure that, that offer at the company that you're looking to work at?
So I have a saying that I use on campus, a part of my presentation called the game. It's a gamified version of the recruitment process. And it's apply early, apply often. And it came from a conversation I had with a new grad maybe 2 weeks ago. And she was really struggling. She applied to 100 jobs and only got 10 OAs. And she was feeling kind of frustrated. And I just, she was looking for like referrals and she really wanted referrals. And referrals are great. It depends on the company. But I was like, no, I think you need to bump up your application numbers. And she was shocked. And I was like, no, it's all about applying early and applying often. And so one way that you can also ensure, though, is what I call ABC companies. And so what I mean by this is, and I use this when I applied to grad school as well. And so applying to different types of companies to ensure that you get a job after graduation. So for me, it's A companies, dream. I'd love to work there. Google was my dream company, my A company, right? B companies it'd be good. Like I'd like to work here. That would be okay. And Uber was actually a B company for me, and it turned into an A company through my experience. And then C is a job's a good thing. And I like to tell people this because I graduated during the recession in 2009, and I was unemployed for 9 months after graduation. And I just never stopped applying. And that's why when I was able to finally get it, people were like, I was just waiting for all the jobs to come back. I was never waiting. I was applying early. I was applying often. I was applying for everything I could. And I kept working on my resume. And so I just like to tell that, I like share that with people because your first job out the gate, like, isn't going to make or break it for you, right? It's not. And so making sure that you have a job so that you can get experience on your resume is going to be super important. And even internship experience. Some people think that their first internship should be like at a FANG company. Realistically, it most likely won't be, right? And so you need to think about, where can I go the summer prior that's going to get me a yes at my A company. So really walking it backwards and trying to understand how you can set yourself up for success by not only applying to like the dream companies, but opening it up and kind of seeing where you land, and then using that summer to catapult yourself into like that dream company.
Yeah, really using your first role as a launching pad. You're not going to be there for 30, 35 years. It's not 50 years ago where that even really is a thing anymore. So I think that definitely makes a lot of sense. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing all these insights with us. I think there's a lot to take away here, especially for those students who are on campus going through the career fairs and all of that fun stuff. I know on the job seeker side, I definitely don't miss those days, but they were important for sure. But
absolutely.
Before we hop, can you let everybody know where they could find and connect with you online?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn and also my website. So both are under I am Heather H. So if you just go to LinkedIn and type in I am Heather H, it'll pop up. And then my website is iamheatherh.com.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on. As always, for everybody listening, this is Brandon Amoroso, and you can find us at scaleless.ai and apexearlycareers.com. And we will see you next time.